Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today I wanted to cover the Warlock in full. Now the reveal was kind of split up over several days, so you've gotten a few videos. You probably have heard all the new skills, the passives, a lot of videos that cover each one in particular, but this video is more of like an overview reveal where we're just going to go over what the Warlock is and what its main synergies are going to be. When we get to like the passive tree, we're going to cover some of the most important aspects of that tree, like the overloads. When we get to the skills, I'm going to cover my favorite interaction out of each skill that I'm looking forward to playing, and then we'll get down into like what you're going to want to look for when it comes to leveling, and then some possible end game builds that we can do with it. So some theory crafting, some of which has been put together by the Maxroll team on the website, and then just some of the most important nodes in my opinion between the skills and the passives. So first, what is the Warlock? And the Warlock is the third mastery for the Acolyte, one we've been waiting for a really long time. It embraces the dark arts through powerful curses and soul magic. So why fight fair when you can hinder foes with torment and anguish, which is two of the curses, and make them easier to defeat? Alternatively, harness the raw destructive power of souls in the form of Chthonic Fissure, Ghost Flame, and Chaos Bolts, three of the new skills, to unleash ruin on your enemies. And then in this gift that we have here, you can see that your 5 new skills are Chthonic Fissure, Chaos Bolts, Ghost Flame, Soul Feast, and Profane Veil, and your Warlock curses are Anguish, Penance, Decryptify, Acid Skin, and Torment. We'll go into slightly more details on the 5 curses a little bit down. And then we have the passive tree, and as you can see, I really love the search bar that we have on this website. You can kind of see what synergizes by looking for the same thing. So first off, I want to cover the overloads, because the overloads are a very important aspect to the Warlock. They seem crucial. Like half the nodes here have to deal with the overloads, and you're just dealing with a lot of dots in the Warlock class and curses, so they seem like they're crucial to the center of the Warlock. So let's cover them. The first one is the Bleed overload. So we have the Cauldron of Blood passive here, which gives you bleed chance, and once you invest 5 points, when you cast a physical skill and enemies within 15 meters have a combined 25 or more stacks of bleed on them, you cast Rip Blood at up to 5 nearby enemies and you gain the Bleed overload. That Bleed overload is going to last 12 seconds, and when you have it proc, you're going to cast up to 5 Rip Bloods on nearby enemies, and to be fair, you can get 25 stacks of bleed pretty easily on a single target, so even up against just a single target boss, you should be able to proc this even easier if you're really building into bleed chance. Now the really cool thing about this overload is this next node, Crimson Favors. This will increase your physical damage, your bleed chance with Rip Blood, but then once you put 4 points in, this is where it gets interesting with your overloads. Your Rip Blood hits have a chance to bleed enemies, and while you have bleed overload, you cast Rip Blood at a nearby enemy every second, which I think is pretty nuts. So you can pretty much, once you have the bleed overload, just constantly be proccing it. I think that is really nuts. Now what's also really cool about this is that not only will you be proccing it every second, if you're using something like Chaos Bolts, it has a node based on your intelligence to also be proccing Rip Blood up to 3 times per second just from using Chaos Bolts. So there's a lot of ways to be proccing Rip Blood. Don't forget we have the old ways like transplanting, having up to 3 Rip Bloods go off. So there's a lot of synergy around Rip Blood and a lot of bleed going on here. Then we have Vile Tide with the Poison Overload. So this node will give you Poison Chance, and when you put 5 points into it, you'll cast a damage over time skill, and enemies within 15 meters have a combined 25 or more stacks of poison. You will gain the Poison Overload for 12 seconds. All these overloads last for 12 seconds. I assume that they have a 12-second cooldown, so you can have 100% uptime, but they're not going to like constantly be refreshing, I assume. I guess we'll have to wait to kind of see how that works, but it's going to be really epic if you can have 100% uptime or just constantly be refreshing them. And then you cast Defiling Nova, which expands outwards, poisoning enemies it hits. Which kind of seems like Aura of Decay, except that it's an expanding form like Smoke Bomb. So excited to kind of see what kind of damage that does. But then more interesting with the Poison Overload is your points in Racid Concoction. Now the node itself gives you ward on potion use as well as mana gain on potion use. But once you put 4 points in there, while you have Poison Overload, using a potion spreads stacks of your poison from all enemies within 15 meters to up to 2 other nearby enemies. So enemies that were just about dead, or perhaps you had a ton of density mobs a whole horde that you brought in next to a boss, you wanted to transfer all that poison to a single target, you could possibly take out rares and bosses much quicker by bringing a horde along with you. And then again, once you use a potion, it spreads the poisons during your poison overload, and it'll spread it up to 2 other enemies for the enemies that you have. So pretty cool. And then the next one is the Damned Overload. So in Chains of Ruin, another 8 points here for up to 104% increased damage chance on hit. When you cast a necrotic skill and enemies within 15 meters have a combined 20 stacks or more of damned, you chain all damned enemies to the ground, you immobilize them, and you gain Damned Overload for 12 seconds. And then, what's really cool is the Grasping Damnation. The chains from the Chains of Ruin node last longer. Additionally, damned that you inflict last longer. So the chain's duration is increased by 30%. That only lasts for 2 seconds, so a 30% increase puts it at roughly like a 2.6, 2.7 duration. And then your increased damned duration by 30% as well. And then the fun part, you put 5 points in here. While you have Damned Overload, you have a chance to chain nearby damned enemies to the ground every second. And the chance to chain damned enemies each second is 30%. And I don't know if that's a single enemy or all nearby enemies every second, but you can see how if you're automatically with the Bleed Overload, already have tons of Rip Bloods blocking, and you have this Damned Overload and you're chaining to the ground, you can see where we're going. All these overloads together seem like they're going to be absolutely nuts. And then that brings us to the last one. And then we have the Ignite Overload. So in the Infernal Lash passive, you can have up to 104% chance to ignite, and after you put 5 points in, you'll get this bonus. When you cast a fire skill and enemies within 50 meters have a combined 25 or more stacks of ignite, you strike up to 3 nearby ignite items with Flame Whip, and you gain the Ignite Overload for 12 seconds. Now I don't have the stats for Flame Whip, but I'm going to assume that perhaps it's either a spell that hits kind of hard, or it's another dot that's being applied, kind of like spreading flames maybe. We'll have to wait to find out the details on that. And then again, this will consume up to 25 of the ignites from nearby enemies to Flame Whip 3 enemies, and then you get that duration for 12 seconds. And then more interestingly is the Scorched Reach, which increases your fire damage, and then while you have Ignite Overload, if you kill an ignited enemy or hit a rare or boss, you have a chance for Flame Whip at a nearby enemy. So you can see where we're going with this. Once you have the overload, it doesn't matter what skill you're using. You're going to be having Rip Bloods going off every second. For the Damned, you're going to have the chance to chain those enemies to the ground every second. And then with the Ignite, you're going to have a chance to hit them with a Flame Whip as well. So like, not only are you doing tons of dots, but you have all these other skills and sub-skills going off. It seems absolutely nuts. And then that brings us to kind of the last kind of sub-skill that I want to bring up here. And that's through the Ashen one. And when you gain Ignite Overload or Damned Overload, all Ignite and Damned enemies within 15 meters are inflicted with Witch Fire. So by putting some points in here, 5 points, you have increased Necrotic and Elemental, so you'll have increased Damned and Fire for Ignite damage. But then, whenever you gain the Ignite or the Damned, whichever one or both, you will then inflict enemies with Witch Fire. And then with Witch Fire, does more damage based on your global chance to ignite with fire skills and chance to damned with necrotic skills. On top of that, you can make it spread whenever you hit these enemies while you have those overloads active, which is absolutely nuts. So you can see how, like, just tons of curses, tons of overloads, tons of ways to spread everything. I am very, very excited for all these. And then the last little thing I want to bring up is that you can get more damage over time per overload that you have active. So if you're able to activate all 4, you can get 12% more damage overall for all those dots, all those curses. It's just absolutely nuts. And then for the curses, now we have covered the curses in a video already, but just to quickly go over them again, you have Anguish. It is a curse that lasts 10 seconds. It reduces the damage over time dealt by afflicted enemies and deals necrotic damage over time to enemies afflicted whenever you kill an enemy. Anguish can not stack, but you can have several things here. When you directly cast a curse skill, you afflict a number of enemies around the target with Anguish. Another nice passive with it is that You can get increased spell damage for curses with 3 points in there. Hitting a boss or rare triggers anguish. So just a couple of passives that really bring the anguish out of you. For penance, it's a curse that lasts 15 seconds. This curse causes afflicted targets to take 20 spell fire damage when they hit another target. Penance does not stack, and then a passive point that reflects it is the Penitent Tangent. Profane Veil's area inflicts penance to enemies, which is a curse that causes enemies to take fire damage when they hit a target. Additionally, penance deals more damage per 1% of damage reflected, multiplicative with other modifiers. So that's kind of insane if you're playing any sort of reflect at all. We have Decryptify, which is a curse that deals 200 physical damage over 10 seconds, which is a very long time in this game, with added damage applying at 100% effectiveness per second. This curse causes the target to take more damage from damage over time effects based on the caster's missing health. And this one, if you're playing a dot build and you have all the overloads already going, you have all those more modifiers, having Decryptify is huge, because if you're doing a low life build and you're missing, say, 90% of your life, that's 90% more damage as a modifier just for putting this curse on those same enemies. And then another passive word: after channeling Ghost Flame for a short duration, the school releases a terrible screech, cursing all nearby enemies with Decryptify. And this is inside of the Ghost Flame skill tree, actually, not a passive. And then the Ghost Flame gains a curse tag when you build it this way, but its direct damage does not scale with increased curse damage. For Acid Skin's a curse which deals 80 poison damage over 5 seconds with added damage applying 80% effectiveness per second. This affliction adds a 20% chance for the curse damage to be critically hit. I'm not a huge, out of all the curses, this is the one I'm probably least interested in, but I'm sure there'll be Chaos Bolts or something where you want to do high crits. There might be a reason why I build into it. And then we have Torment, which is a curse that deals 120 spell necrotic damage over 3 seconds with added damage applying at 200% effectiveness per second. This curse reduces the movement speed of afflicted enemies by 12%. It can't stack. And then just a couple of things. Chthonic Fissure, it applies it on hit, which is really nice. You can automatically get it with Chthonic Fissure. And then with Spirit Gear, when torment enemies die, they have a chance to release the spirit to inflict torment another enemy. So you use Chthonic Fissure, you have it killing enemies. If those enemies have torment on them, they have a chance to spread it to another enemy. For the Warlock skills, like I said, I'm not going to go into details. We did a few videos. We covered the nodes. There's been several people that have done it. I just want to go over, I think what my favorite node or my favorite interaction out of each one of these will be, and possibly even maybe the first build that I'll go for. So for Chaos Bolts, I really like the zombies in this. So once you work down here with Chthonic Aura, and you have those extra projectiles and the mana cost, right below it you get the Volatile Kindling, which causes, when you hit a zombie with your Chaos Bolt, it causes that zombie to explode instantly, dealing more damage and in a larger area. And then the node beyond that makes it do it even more. So they do even more damage, even more area, and then they poison enemies as well. Now the reason that I think that's really interactive there is because with all those poison stacks going out, this could be a way for you to get poison overload along with the other overloads without really building in any poison chance. And that's why I think that node is really, really interesting. At least that's my theory crafting behind it. For Ghost Flame, I'm pretty sure that most people are going to agree that Marrow Shards is probably the most interesting aspect of this when it comes to proccing another skill. I'm really interested in the Marrow Shards version of this and having that auto be casted while you channel it and seeing how long you can channel it. And then of course there's also that Decryptify curse down here that I think could also be really, really cool. For Soul Feast, it's a skill that I've never really liked. I probably still won't enjoy it, but I thought that it was a cool way to really get that withering out. So being able to get the stacks of withering up here, which goes along with some of your passives in the top half of the tree, I think is pretty sick. So I really enjoy that node. Then for Profane Veil, again, zombies. So down here at the bottom, once you get past the vampiric pull, you get into the apocalypse where you can summon zombies on exit depending on how long that you were channeling for. On top of that, these zombies have increased damage and area based on your int. And lastly, can trigger when you kill enemies with Profane Veil. So it's just the synergy here with just getting some kills and just zombies in general is really, really awesome. And then lastly, we have Chthonic Fissure, and of course, again, you can probably see where I'm going with this. the zombies. So what I really like about Chthonic Fissure is that it has two things. So down here at the bottom of Chthonic Fissures, you can actually make the fissure itself spam zombies. So you actually get zombies coming out every 2 seconds. And then what's cool about this is your spirits that are being, those spirits that we saw, you can actually make them into chaos bolts. So you have a 60% chance for the spirits that come flying out to be chaos bolts instead. So my idea here is you throw it on your fissures, you have a bunch of zombies coming out, possibly even the zombies on mana potion use, or on the belt on potion use. You know, get a lot of zombies going for basically free, get them out there without having to manually cast them. The fissures are automatically doing your chaos bolts. Perhaps maybe you are even doing some of your chaos bolts. Those chaos bolts are then hitting your zombies, causing them to explode in a much larger area. So I feel like there's going to be a really good zombie build there. I'm excited to really build into that and see if it's good, if it's broken. You know, I have a feeling mana could play a big issue in trying to get it to work, but I have some high hopes for it. Then for just Warlock Leveling, so a lot of you are probably new players. You know, obviously we haven't played Warlock before, so what are we going to do? So just based on what we're showing, let's go over some things that possibly could be really good ways to level it up really quick. And for any of you that have already played, we already know Spirit Plague and like the Lich or Reaper form, very quick way to level. But for the Warlock, things could change just a little. So based on what's shown, the Maxroll last Epoch team would level the Warlock with a Bleed build, using Chthonic Fissure to proc Chaos Bolts, which could also proc Bone Curse and Rip Blood. So tons of bleed, I assume the bleed overload, you know, lots of good stuff going on there. The setup is bound to hit monsters a lot, allowing you to apply tons of bleed stacks without any uniques or exalted items. Looking at the dot and bleed support available in Warlock, passive tree and skill trees, you have the Cauldron of Blood, so you have that bleed overload like I was saying. You have the Spiteful Decay, which is increased damage over time and more per overload that you have. Or this one's actually just more damage to cursed enemies, and then the Vessel of Chaos being more damage per overload you have. Seems like an easy way to stack a lot of bleed, a lot of dot damage really easily throughout the campaign to really get you moving along. I'll probably try that. Again, I'm kind of excited for the zombies. Zombies have always worked really well for me, so I may just try to go zombies right off the bat, assuming that I even play Warlock first. And then scaling mechanics, the Spirit Plague tree has passives like Putrid Recovery, Laceration, and Exsanguination, which scale with your damage survivability based on the number of hits that you inflict. So again, Spirit Plague really going to be tied in there. I think Spirit Plague even has, is it Laceration? Yeah, you can apply a lot of bleeds with Spirit Plague as well. So really we'll dive into that. The Warlock also has early access to Leech in the passive tree with Spirit Leech. This is the big one. A lot of times, especially as an Acolyte, early on it feels like you don't have a lot of sustainability, especially if you're a Necromancer with minions. If you take hits, you're kind of using potions. You don't really have sustain since you're not doing damage. So having access to Leech and doing damage early on will feel really, really good. And then in the passive tree, there are nodes such as Dark Protection, so you take less damage from cursed enemies. You have Wither, more or less damage from people that are withered. The Doom Herald, so that you do more damage while channeling and take less damage while channeling. Should really improve, especially if you're using Ghost Flame at all, should really improve your survivability. And I kind of see Ghost Flame as kind of that rebuke option to channel it, take all the damage reduction nodes in it for all the one big hits that you know are coming. And that's exactly what it says. Ghost Flame looks really good with that, with all that reduced damage being taken. Same as Rebuke, yep. Same thing I was actually just thinking. Rocking this many skills might lead to some mana sustain issues, so investing in the passive tree on your gear might be a good idea. Nodes like the Soul Eater, that has a chance to give you some mana back when you hit an enemy that is cursed. So things like that could definitely help you. Like I said earlier, if we went zombies, zombies have a mana cost. I think it's actually decently high. Could be the issue, but overall, applying bleeds probably not a bad way to go at all. And then we have the Warlock builds. And for the Warlock builds, kind of like I said up in the trees above when we were looking through the skill trees, the zombies is kind of what I'm looking at, but let's see some other options that we have here. So although the Warlock has access to many ways to sustain health with nodes like Cursed Blood, Devour of the Damned, and passives like Spirit Leech, it appears that it might be amazing synergy with low life, and both the Necromancer and Lich also do really well with low life unless you're doing Death Seal with the Lich, in which case you just have so much Leech, and you're always, whenever you have Death Seal activated, you're getting rid of any ward and can't have ward. So outside of that build, low life is pretty good for those classes, so I expect it to be really good for the Warlock as well. And the Warlock has early access to haste thanks to the Fleeting Cone, which gives you a chance to haste whenever hitting a rare boss or on kill, and that has increased effect on you as well, so you can be a nice speed runner, go nice and fast. And then the Warlock has tons of support for bleed, ignite, poison, and damned, which we saw in those overloads. And you can definitely mix that up with some uniques and other things, which I'm sure there'll be some new ones that we can probably float in there. Even old ones, I did a video on some of the old ones that have good synergies with bleed, ignite, poison, and damned. So if you find any of those along the way, definitely can boost your build. And then for the scaling and mechanics, alternatively, you can focus on boosting the raw damage of curses with nodes like Wither, where you're putting just tons of Wither on the enemy, of course. And again, I said my favorite thing in Soul Feast was the fact that you could put 3 stacks of Wither on the enemy. Unholy Torment, which gives flat spell damage for curses and increases the area for them. You have Duskbringer, where you have even more spell damage for curses, and then of course hitting a boss or rare enemy now also triggers the damage from Anguish as well, which, you know, lots of things you can trigger, lots of ways to add up and multiply your damage out inside of that passive tree, which I really like to see. The Chthonic Fisher's Spirits apply a dot curse called Torment, and it looks like Twisted Waves, where you can get damage per 2% necrotic res, or per 2% necrotic res you can get 1% more damage. You can put 3 points here, so you can actually get that. So if you can stack unlimited amount of necrotic res, literally anything you find during the campaign, just throwing that on and scaling it unlimitedly, I mean infinitely scaling here, those things always prove to be kind of overpowered. So I'm very excited to see that. You've got Grim Tide, where you can get necrotic damage per 1% added crit multi, another one that scales infinitely for you. There's no cap on it, so that seems pretty poggers. The Tom Gorger, which torment damage is straight up more damage. The Crowns of Ruin for that duration of torment, as well as other ailment duration. So lots of ways to really build into just damage in general, torment damage, and scale it way into the end game, where you can start getting tier 6, tier 7 affixes of that necrotic res and crit multi. The Warlock has tons of synergies between skills and ways to proc each other. Nodes like the Another Affliction for the Bone Curse, your Exacted Liberation for the Rip Blood, the Reaper of Mayhem for Harvest procs, the Thrust of Bones for Marrow Shards. Yeah, lots of synergies between the skills, so one of those is going to be good. I think Marrow Shards is going to have a good way to proc. I think having the Harvest is going to have a good chance, because I know inside the Harvest tree that you can have it buff your minions, so I see something there. Obviously, Rip Blood's going off. The more of those that you can have, I see definitely something goes. Bone Curse has never been a bad choice for any build. There's a powerful synergy between Chaos Bolts, the Summon Zombies, everything that I told you there about the zombies exploding with all those extra hits from the Chaos Bolts. That seems to be absolutely insane. And then Profane Veil can provide a crazy global damage buff thanks to Scorn, which damage to cursed enemies while concealed is 10%, which is absolutely nuts. So you could put your fissures out there and have them on the ground, and then you could be channeling your Profane Veil, and while you're in it, have a more damage multiplier going off, which is pretty much it's just lots of more modifiers, make it just kind of go crazy. And then of course we can't wait to make a sadistic build around the aspect of death, where you damn yourself every time on kill or on minion. You damn yourself when you get hit. There's other uniques in the game that I believe work. We went over some of them the other day in a video where you can ignite your self with like potion use, and there's just ways to put a bunch of damned, ignite, and ailments on yourself, which is really going to allow you to build up that damage. So building around that, seeing who can get the most stacks before it's too much damage to survive, especially if some players are playing in hardcore, I think that's going to be a fun one to watch live. So, but that's going to be it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. That's my full Warlock reveal for you. That's the skills, the passives, some theory crafting around it without, you know, turning this into a 5-hour video. And I think overall, the class is going to be a lot of fun. Let me know what you think below in the comments, and I'll get back to you. As always, stay safe, and see ya.